Yes, some of you were here yesterday as well, so I'll just look back in a way. I'll uh, present you now the recommendations for action, crack action. Here, I'm not really referring to crack as a substance. A lot of these recommendations, and that's something that Maurice has already mentioned. Um, uh, I will simply re repeat that if you like. And if there are contradictions, then please say something as well, Maurice. So these recommendations for action, this is a document which was published about 2 years ago. The link is here at the bottom. The PowerPoint presentation will be published, so you can then click on the link. These are recommendations that have arisen from practical social work, but also from the work of the municipalities and experiences made in research. And it really focuses also on the increased use of crack or crack cocaine. It is generally known that cocaine use has increased massively in Europe and Germany. That's is something we've seen in low threshold addiction aid. And then, of course, we've also got the preparation of crack using cocaine. All of this is now really in the has come to the attention of the public. And on the basis of that, we've now formulated a few recommendations. We had the first crack conference 2 years ago, happened in the same room. So that was a starting point really for us, and we started to try to formulate some recommendations. We've finalized them by January 2023. It's a working document. We also realized that municipalities and practitioners really needed or wanted something. They wanted some sort of guidelines. So we simply reflected on our practice. We really found quite a few practices which we think we can build on. Then we also had a handout which was published in April 2024. That is the product of another working group in coordination with the German AIDS Relief Association. Yesterday we had our second crack conference, and that meant that we also updated some of these recommendations. There are some newer or more recent developments also in the legal arena, which we've now integrated. And then we also included some practice examples which have arisen from the last 2 years. They're not necessarily best practice because crack use in public areas is still a controversial field because you have to navigate regulatory policy and health issues. So we're not really working just in the area of addiction care, where everything's positive. No, there are different functions which we keep in mind here. And in 2 or 3 years, we can probably have a better view on what has really stood the test of time, what has been positive, and how can we really help people, crack users. That's something we'll keep working on, and hopefully we'll have something by the end of the year. Now, here are some recommendations. There are lots of them. And when you read those recommendations, you see that they are also all linked with each other. It's difficult to structure them clearly. So one recommendation could be in one chapter or another chapter. It's all very complex and all really linked. But Morris has already mentioned it. Prevention is an important element. So people who are already drug consumers or alcohol consumers or who are vulnerable, they can you can also use prevention work for those groups. So we need to educate people and people who might be interested in crack or may have tried it or already. We can still help them to make informed choices, and we can help them really use control strategies for themselves. Control strategies are quite often negatively connotated, but it's really about people getting to know themselves better. So we can maybe give them recommendations as to how they can restrict themselves, as it were. So you don't lose control using a particular substance. Then substitution approaches are also very important. And then we also have motivational interviewing. That's something that is also part of a KISS program. So we have different formats which we really want to be reactivated, and especially when it's focused on crack. Then the next big area, that's harm reduction. Here we've got a really good handout. We have safer use messages. So yeah, so here we can really explain why bicarbonate soda is better than ammonia. Yeah, the right ratios, 4 to 1. How can you transform cocaine into crack? These are very specialist topics, but they're very, very important, of course, for drug users. But we also discuss what is better. Should people really prepare their own crack, or should they simply buy the finished product, the rocks? Then a second point here, it's also nutritional offers and provision, because when people really focus on consumption of a particular substance, cocaine, for example, then they quite often neglect nutrition. Then you need a substance monitoring and drug checking. Uh, there's in our legislation, of course, paragraph 10b, which is an important factor here. But at the end of the day, we really need to monitor substances and check drugs. And then, of course, we've also got the use of consumption utensils. Maybe that can also be combined with communication information. Next section is places of consumption. Where do people consume drugs? Well, we've got drug consumption rooms, but a lot of work still needs to be done. We've heard in hospitals or rehab facilities, there are lots of rules which really don't necessarily make sense. And there are lots of rules really which you should question, because quite often they lift the threshold even further, and it makes it difficult for people to access services at times. Some of these rules are really an expression of overprotection, and I think there we really need to counteract those tendencies. Then we've got the stay in facilities with drug consumption rooms, but also in rooms just outside drug consumption rooms or in yards at the back of a building, for example. In those areas, people don't just consume, but also interact socially and stay during the day. We really need to fight for more spaces like that, which are then adequately resourced. That is an important topic because many residents feel annoyed by drug users in the neighborhood. Well, it doesn't need to be the way. There are certain alternatives which ensure that a good or pleasant way of cohabitation is and a coexistence, if you like, is made possible. Many of our recommendations also concern communication and contact, and it's really very often about prevention of violence and de-escalation. We've heard earlier there are many structural conditions which really lead to violence. It's not the substance itself. Very often it's the circumstances and the conditions and the setting in which people move. So here we need de-escalation. That's really concerns our facilities, but also the environment around our facilities. One shouldn't be surprised if people react with violence if there is over-policing, for example. So here it's really important to lower the threshold. We want to make sure people can really access treatment and advice. These are very often organizational changes that can help. Yeah, so if you only uh, if if you're flexible enough, then you can help drug users as well. You know, you have to want to make sure that drug users really make the most of advice services. In low threshold settings, it is particularly important to ask the question, what can we do to really make a difference through measures which are structural, organizational, and above all, client-centered. Yeah, we've already heard from Switzerland, fewer rules is normally better. And then, of course, you need to train the staff as well. Now, next section, low threshold aid. That's one of the most some of the most important measures are really rest and sleep options really for drug consumers. Uh, of course, you also want to use advice. It is again linked to organizational setups. Hamburg is a very good example here. We also need extended medical provision, also for people who haven't got recourse to public funds or are not covered by health insurance. We're still really suffering because because very often the language is not appropriate. And we really need to make sure that we don't work in silos. So we really have to work cross-sectional. That's something that was mentioned yesterday as well. And all those measures, of course, need to be practical, pragmatic. Now, the legal framework, and I don't think we've got a representative of the federal government. Yeah, we all suffer really as a result of the Drugs Act, especially paragraph 10A and 10B, because it means that we very often act in a gray area, in a legal gray area. Drug consumption rooms are governed by paragraph 10A, and this questions really the legality of drug consumption rooms. And uh, of course, it concerns, of course, also areas in front of the drug consumption room, at the front or the back. And the truth is that any kind of disco even has got a house dealer, if you like. That's just a fact. So we really need to work towards changing paragraph 29. That we need to make sure that it's no longer a criminal offense here. And paragraph 10A, we want to make sure that there's no criminal prosecution if there are certain acts in connection with drug consumption rooms and the use of drug consumption rooms. Now, for crack, what is really relevant here as well is the group consumption and substance. Drug checking is another very important measure. In Berlin, we have a particular issue with the substance mixtures, and that is something that we really need to explore proactively. For example, and we only found out because the police um, really raided two labs, and that's why they found out why there was a particular substance mixture. That's something we really need to explore more proactively. Then we also need to make sure that we integrate our addiction aid. We work together with municipalities, make sure that we can find accommodation. Quite often, we also have to make sure that low threshold services work with partners, neighbors, even. And we also need to be integral to all planning activities. Next section, research, science, and the public. So we still need more evidence. We need to find out more about crack consumption. Yeah, but many people who deal with people on the ground, they know a lot, but I think research circles still need to catch up here, and that will hopefully then give us some pointers as to what else we need to develop, what we need to work towards. And yesterday we also talked about the therapy approaches based on medication. That is something we need more information. Uh, Compared to 2 years ago, there has been a noticeable progress. 2 years ago, studies were assessed totally differently. Yeah, now we see the therapy approach using amphetamines totally differently, and the off-label use also needs to be established now in practice. But that can only happen if research really supports that change with an evidence base. Of course, the discourse also needs to change. We don't want any language that talks about zombies because that just leads to a stigmatization of crack users. We really need to make sure that we stay objective here, talk in objective terms about crack consumption. And it's important to keep an eye on that discourse in the media world. Scandalizing headlines and pictures do not help. How can we really make a contribution to a more objective discourse? And that, in the end, then helps the public discourse in general. So that was just a quick overview, but I'm happy to take questions if there are any questions.